Nathan Bell had never been a man to ask for much. A long driveway, a quiet stretch of rented land, and a solid roof over a weathered barn. That was enough. He didn't bother his neighbors, didn't hang flags or wave opinions. His world was made of pine wood, hand tools, and the kind of silence only a wide field could offer. He wasn't from the city, nor was he a lifer in this small, dust-blown county. He'd simply drifted here after his contracting business in the valley went under, found a spot on the edge of a farm that an old rancher was willing to lease, and decided that rebuilding wasn't always about money or pride. Sometimes it was about space. He worked with his hands, refurbished furniture, fixed the occasional busted trailer axle, and spent the rest of his time alone, shaping cedar boards into canoe frames and aging fence posts into benches. The barn, a tilted old structure with rust on the roof and scars on the beams, became both his workshop and retreat. The arrangement had worked well. The rancher, a man named Doyle, lived 2 counties away now. Too old to manage the place but unwilling to sell the land outright. Nathan sent him a check every 3 months, kept the gate closed, the grass cut, and the pipes from freezing in the winter. That was the deal. No HOA, no patrols, no clipboard committees. Just work, wood, and weather. But peace is rarely respected by the kind of people who don't understand what it costs. It began without noise. The kind of intrusion that slides in unnoticed at first, small enough to ignore, but pointed enough to stick. One evening in early summer, Nathan returned from picking up a batch of reclaimed planks. The road was dry, his back ached from lifting alone, and he just wanted to drop the boards inside the barn before the mosquitoes got ambitious. But when he opened the side door and stepped in, the beam of his flashlight caught something out of place, something smooth and white, out of rhythm with the barn's battered texture. Sitting dead center in the middle of his workspace, right in the path where he always rolled his sawhorse, was a glossy golf cart. At first, Nathan just stood there, one hand still gripping the edge of the door. It wasn't just that the cart was parked inside. It was how it was parked, like someone had measured the spot, chosen it deliberately, and reversed it in with care. The tires hadn't left tracks on the dirt floor, meaning whoever did it had come in during the dry stretch, likely that morning. In the passenger seat sat a floral tote bag, and the key was still in the ignition. As Nathan stepped closer, the faint scent of air freshener, that artificial coconut kind, lingered in the stale air. There was even an insulated tumbler half full of something pink resting in the cup holder. Whoever had left it had done so with complete confidence that they could return without consequence. He looked around for signs of a break-in, but the door had been latched. Not locked, since he didn't see the point of locking doors miles from the nearest paved road, but enough to keep out wind and wildlife. That meant one thing. Someone had entered his space with intention. Not by mistake, not out of necessity, but because they believed they had a right to. The next morning, while hauling out his jigsaw from behind a wall of tarped shelving, Nathan heard tires crunching gravel and looked up to see the cart returning. This time, it was driven by a woman he'd seen once or twice near the edge of the settlement. Sharp chin, wide sunglasses, short blonde hair that never seemed to move with the wind. She wore wedge sandals and a sleeveless blouse like she'd stepped out of a tennis club from 2 counties away, and her expression was somewhere between cheerful and dismissive. She didn't kill the engine when she pulled up to the barn door. She simply waved and said, as if picking up a conversation they never started, "Morning. I hope you didn't move the cart. I told Toby I'd need it again today." Nathan didn't answer right away. He took a long second to finish securing the saw, then wiped his hands on the back of his jeans and stepped outside. "You left it in my barn," he said evenly. No hostility, just statement. Karen, that was her name, he remembered now, gave him a half-smile like she didn't hear it. "It's just a quick park. You've got so much space and the sun's been brutal lately. These carts bake in the heat, you know." "That's not public storage," Nathan replied. "It's my workspace. You're blocking the interior path. I've got wood deliveries stacked out back and no way to haul them through." She blinked, and for a second he saw it. The shift in her gaze, the mental wheel turning not toward apology, but strategy. "Well, I didn't think you'd mind," she said with a little laugh. "I mean, nobody really uses this old barn, do they? It's just sitting here. I even checked with Mr. Doyle last year when we were doing the easement resurvey, and he said the whole lot was in flexible use." "Flexible use doesn't mean drop-in storage," Nathan said. "It's leased. I've got paperwork if you want to see it." Karen shrugged, unbothered. "No need to get technical, Nathan. I'm just trying to keep my grandkids from getting heat stroke, okay? It's a golf cart, not a backhoe." That was how it began, with a smile, a rationalization, and the assumption that the rules didn't apply because they weren't written in capital letters on a metal sign. That day, Nathan didn't argue further. He let her pull the cart out, watched her drive off toward her oversized ranch-style house at the end of the road, and closed the barn door behind him. But he didn't forget. He photographed the tracks. He documented the tire prints, the tote bag, the angle of entry, because something told him this wasn't going to be the last time she wandered onto his ground like it was a free-range privilege. Over the next 2 weeks, Nathan noticed subtle shifts around the property. Once, he found a note left on the workbench that read, "You should consider clearing out. Things look pretty abandoned from the road." No name, just the condescending courtesy of a woman who thought she was helping. Another time, a lawn care truck was parked partially across his access path, blocking him from backing in his pickup with a load of lumber. The driver said, "I was told this section's up for redevelopment." Told by who? Nathan didn't have to ask. He knew the pattern. It was the soft kind of takeover. The one that didn't come with hammers or tape, but with slow pushes, verbal ambiguity, and an endless stream of, "You wouldn't mind if..." The straw that bent wasn't the cart. It was the plug. He walked into the barn one afternoon and found her cart again. This time not just parked, but plugged into one of his indoor outlets using an extension cord. The meter was spinning. His electricity, his tools unplugged so she could charge her ride in the shade. No note, no knock, just entitlement, humming through the line. Nathan didn't yell. He didn't throw the cord out or damage the cart. He just stood there a minute, quiet like a man weighing an invisible scale. Then he reached for his phone not to call anyone, not yet, but to start the documentation that would become the spine of what was coming next. Because people like Karen didn't back off when told. They didn't listen when reasoned with. They backed off when something bigger than them told them they'd pushed too far, and Nathan Bell, quiet carpenter and tenant of this crooked patch of dust, was about to be that something. Nathan didn't react immediately to the plugged-in golf cart, but something shifted after that moment. It wasn't rage or even frustration. It was that cold, clear stillness a man experiences when the pattern finally clicks, when he sees not just a nuisance, but a campaign. Karen hadn't just crossed a line. She'd made herself at home on his side of it, and worse, she expected him to accept that as normal. Her logic was the kind you couldn't argue with because it never operated on facts. It was built on the assumption that her convenience was the natural center of the world. Everything outside of it, other people's property, other people's time, other people's rights, existed merely to serve it, or be adjusted until they did. That night, Nathan turned off the main breaker to the barn. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't leave a note or block the cart inside. He simply made sure that whatever energy Karen thought she had access to would be cut off at the source. Then he sat down with his paperwork, scanned copies of the lease agreement, annotated maps, emails with Doyle, photos of the cart, and documentation of his workshop inventory. By midnight, he had created a digital folder with timestamps, legal markers, and detailed descriptions. He didn't send anything to anyone yet, but the preparation itself calmed him. It was methodical, controlled. A quiet assertion that he was not some passive figure in someone else's narrative. 2 days passed. No sign of the cart. Nathan assumed the breaker had sent the message clearly, until a knock echoed on his barn door one afternoon while he was fitting dowels into a cedar bench. He opened the door and saw a man he didn't recognize. Late 40s, tan windbreaker, sunglasses despite the overcast sky. The man didn't introduce himself by name. He simply said, "Hi there, I'm with Property Services. Just wanted to take a look around, make sure everything's compliant." Nathan narrowed his eyes. "Compliant with what?" "Usage codes," the man said vaguely, as if the answer should be obvious. "We've had some reports about unauthorized equipment storage and unsafe structures. Gotta make sure no one's squatting, you understand." "I have a lease," Nathan said flatly. "From the landowner." The man nodded, pretending that mattered, but then asked if he could take a look inside the barn, just for confirmation. Nathan told him no, absolutely not. If there was a formal complaint, it could be submitted through the county office with proper identification. The man stood there for another second, like he might push the issue, but then just smiled, thanked Nathan, and walked off, leaving a vague flyer in the doorframe that referenced rural fire code updates. Nothing that applied. The visit wasn't random. Nathan knew it, and so did the man. It was Karen, again, using back channels and informal influence to stir dust where there was none. She hadn't come herself this time. That would have been too obvious. But the knock had her fingerprints all over it. He hadn't even responded to her latest intrusion, and still, she escalated. That was the warning sign. Not just entitlement, but control. She couldn't stand that he had refused her, and now she was testing how far she could push before he pushed back. Later that week, Nathan drove into town to pick up replacement sanding belts. When he returned, he found a laminated sheet stapled to the barn's front post. "Community Notice," it read in big, bold font. Beneath it, a message that made his jaw tighten. "This structure has been informally designated as a multi-use shared shelter in times of extreme heat. Neighbors are encouraged to utilize the space respectfully during daytime hours." It wasn't signed by any authority. No letterhead. Just a printed sheet from someone's desktop and the smug assumption that Nathan would be too isolated or outnumbered to fight it. He pulled it down and didn't say a word. That night, he installed a trail camera on the tree facing the barn and wired it to a motion sensor light. He also added a thick bolt to the door, one that couldn't be opened from the outside without a key. It wasn't about secrecy. It was about clarity. The message was simple. This place is not yours, and your assumptions mean nothing here. But Karen was not someone who processed messages like that. The next time she returned, she didn't come alone. Nathan was inside when he heard the low hum of tires on gravel. Through the small side window, he saw 2 carts, Karen's and another identical model, driven by a man in a visor with a Bluetooth earpiece. They pulled up to the barn like they were arriving at a country club meeting. Karen stepped out with a folding chair under one arm and a tote bag in the other. The man stayed in the cart, idling. Nathan stepped outside before she could reach the door. "Afternoon," she said brightly, as if their last exchange had never happened. "Just dropping off a few things. We're planning a small gathering this weekend. Just the girls and a few bites. Shade's hard to come by, and I figured since you're usually gone Sundays—" "No," Nathan said. Not a yell, not a speech, just one word, firm and final. Karen paused like she hadn't heard him, then smiled as if she had. "I don't think it'll interfere with your work, and it's just for a few hours. We'll clean up after ourselves. Besides, you're technically on communal farmland. The lines have always been fuzzy back here." "The lease isn't fuzzy," Nathan replied. "The property line isn't fuzzy. The lock you cut last week wasn't fuzzy either." That was the first time her face really changed. Not anger, not yet, but something colder. A recalibration. She looked at the man in the second cart, then back at Nathan. "You're being very territorial, Nathan. I understand the instinct, but it doesn't look good when people become difficult, especially when they're only tenants. You don't own the barn. You rent it." Nathan didn't flinch. "That still makes it mine to manage, not yours to redefine." There was a long silence. Karen stared at him, measuring something. Then she turned as if the conversation bored her. "We'll be back Sunday," she said to no one in particular, and climbed into the cart. As they drove off, Nathan stood in the heat, hands still, mind already working through what would happen next, because it wasn't over. Karen wasn't trying to reason or compromise. She was trying to set precedent. Appear enough times, act like the space is hers, and eventually no one will question it. The problem was, Nathan did question it, and he had records. What she didn't know was that he had already started the process of reinforcing his lease with an addendum, one that would explicitly state restrictions against unauthorized access, use, or alteration. He'd spoken to Doyle and gotten verbal approval, and the paperwork was already in the mail. In a few days, she wouldn't just be rude, she'd be trespassing, legally, provably, and unambiguously. But Karen wasn't one to wait for lines to be drawn. On Saturday morning, Nathan found the side fence torn down. The old split-rail boundary that separated the barn's access path from the neighbor's orchard had been yanked out and stacked on the side like it had never mattered. No note, no explanation, just open access where there had once been a clear divide. He didn't have to guess who did it. This wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was an encroachment, steady and methodical, disguised as casual oversight. And Nathan knew that if he let this pass, if he allowed her to return on Sunday and hold her little event like nothing had happened, she'd never leave that barn again. Not until it was hers in everything but name. And so, that evening, while the air cooled and the sunset burned the trees orange, Nathan sat on the porch and planned what would happen next. He had no intention of arguing with her anymore. No point. People like Karen didn't understand boundaries until they were reinforced physically, visibly, and without room for negotiation. She wanted to test whether the barn could be shared. He'd make sure she understood exactly what it meant to trespass on a man's space. Nathan had spent most of his adult life learning how to solve problems without drama. That was the unspoken contract between men who worked with their hands. You kept your space clear, your tools sharp, and your voice low. You fixed what was broken, didn't stir the dust unless it needed stirring, and you never, under any circumstance, involved the law unless you were ready to go all the way. But Sunday morning didn't just test that code, it cracked it right down the middle. He woke early, as usual. The light outside was soft, dew still glistening on the grass, and the air had that early summer stillness before the heat came in. Nathan loaded up a crate of milled cedar he had prepped the night before, planning to finish fitting a custom window frame for an old client who still mailed checks and didn't ask for updates. As he neared the barn, he slowed. Something was off. Voices. Laughter. At first he thought maybe someone had wandered too close on the outer trail. Hikers sometimes passed through, even though the land wasn't marked as public. But as he rounded the path that curved behind the rear of the barn, he froze. The door was wide open. Tables had been set up, folding ones, the cheap kind with plastic tops and aluminum legs. There were trays of finger food, stacks of disposable cups, and a Bluetooth speaker sitting dead center, blasting some upbeat playlist that clashed violently with the countryside. 4 women were seated in camping chairs, one of them applying sunscreen to her neck. Another was filling wine glasses. And parked right in front of the open barn door was Karen's golf cart, again, now decorated with a string of battery-powered lights. It wasn't a visit, it was a takeover. Nathan didn't say anything at first. He stood in the path, hands on his hips, taking it all in. The setup, the music, the fake hospitality in the air. Karen spotted him a few seconds later and stood up as if greeting an old friend. "There he is," she called, raising her wine glass like a toast. "We thought you might be out for the day." Hope it's okay we got a little head start." He didn't walk forward. "This is private property." Karen didn't even blink. "It's a barn, Nathan. Not a military bunker. We're just having a bit of fun. Some sunshine, some snacks. I promise we'll clean up." "I didn't ask you to clean up. I told you to stay off the property." Karen's smile remained fixed, but her voice lost its syrup. "Don't be so stiff. Nobody's hurting anything, and frankly, it's kind of nice to see the space used for something lively." One of the other women leaned in and whispered something to her, and Karen waved her hand like brushing off a fly. Nathan turned without another word and walked back to his truck. He didn't yell, didn't threaten. He simply opened the glove box, pulled out a worn folder marked with the lease documents and the fresh addendum he'd just had notarized, then walked to the edge of the property, photographed the entire setup from a wide angle, and attached everything to a clean, direct email addressed to the county's Rural Property Oversight Office. He also forwarded the message to Doyle. No drama, just evidence. Let them see the full scope of what was happening. By the time he got back to the barn, Karen and her group were taking selfies. Music still blaring. Plates scattered, champagne being poured like they were at some overpriced retreat. He waited at the edge of the gravel until she looked at him again. "You have 30 minutes, he said. "After that, I'll call a tow and have everything removed." Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. We're not blocking anything. You have space. This is overreacting." Nathan didn't respond. He pulled out his phone, hit record, and filmed a slow, 360-degree scan of the scene. Then he walked into the barn, opened his storage locker, and retrieved the crate of tools he kept for emergencies. He didn't say another word as he moved around them, ignoring their muttering and stares, and began inspecting the workbench that had been shifted 3 feet to the left without his permission. That night, after the women finally cleared out, leaving behind crushed cups and 2 cracked boards from someone climbing onto the edge of the sawhorse to take a barn pose photo, Nathan began reinforcing the entry. He installed a new padlock system with an internal bolt, added a chain loop to the side post, and secured every external opening. No more easy entry. No more borrowed shade. The barn was no longer just his workspace. It was a line in the dirt. But escalation never waits for logic. On Tuesday, Nathan returned from the hardware store to find a notice stapled to the barn door. Civic complaint. Unauthorized use of structure for commercial purposes. It bore no official seal, just a typed-up statement referencing vague zoning violations and a phone number belonging to a local ordinance consultant. He called it out of curiosity. The line went straight to voicemail. No name, no department. Just a robotic voice asking him to leave a message. He emailed the county office with copies. They confirmed no such notice had been filed. It was a forgery, sloppy but dangerous, because whoever typed it had used language that sounded legal, hoping to scare him into silence. Later that week, he found his trash bins tipped over, their contents dragged down the gravel path. His woodpile was disturbed. Nothing stolen but the stacking pattern broken, as if someone had climbed it or knocked it over. Small signs, but not random. Then came the real turning point. One morning, as Nathan rolled open the barn doors, he noticed that the corner shelves had been rifled through. Nothing big was missing. No tools, no equipment, but someone had definitely been inside. The new lock hadn't been broken. No signs of force, but the floor was scuffed in a pattern that didn't match his work. He followed the marks to the back corner behind the storage tarp, and there it was, Karen's card again, covered this time with a beige-fitted sheet like a makeshift disguise. Someone had rolled it in and covered it up, fully expecting to come back for it. Nathan stood in silence for a full minute. He stared at the sheet, at the tire tracks, at the insulting presumption that this would go unnoticed. And then he acted. He didn't touch the cart right away. Instead, he grabbed his phone and photographed everything. Every angle, every mark, every item that had been moved. He sent another email to the county office, ceasing Doyle again. This time, he included the updated lease with language specifically barring unauthorized storage. Then he got to work. He fetched the portable winch system he used to lift raw beams during solo installations, anchored it to the upper loft beam in the barn, reinforced with a metal bracket, attached a soft lifting harness to the front and rear axles of the cart. Then, inch by inch, he hoisted it up until it hung there, swaying gently in the musty barn air, 6 feet off the ground, like some mechanical fruit left to ripen in shame. He didn't damage it, didn't scratch the paint or bend the frame, but he left it there, tied off, secure, hanging in plain view. Then he locked the barn, backed away, and waited. Karen didn't come that day, or the next. But word travels, even in silence. And when she finally did appear, 3 days later, it wasn't with her usual smile. She didn't knock. She didn't greet. She stood outside the barn, arms crossed, her lips pressed in a flat line as Nathan approached from the path. Her voice, when it came, was lower than usual. "What the hell is this?" "Your property," Nathan said, "safely secured so it won't block the work area." "You vandalized it." "Nope. Didn't touch a thing that would damage it. But I did report unauthorized storage, trespass, and a forged zoning notice to the county. Want copies?" Karen didn't answer. Her silence said more than words. Nathan took a breath. "This ends now. Or next time, I won't be so polite." She stared at him. For the first time, she didn't have a quip, or a smirk, or a vague legal bluff. She just turned around, climbed into a different cart, and left without a word. Nathan watched her go, knowing that she wouldn't give up. Not fully. But something had changed. The dynamic had shifted. This wasn't about conversation anymore. It was about leverage. And now, for once, he had it. The cart stayed hanging for 2 more days. Then it vanished. Nathan didn't see who came for it. He didn't check the cameras. He just found the space empty. The rope still coiled neatly where it had been tied off. But from that day forward, Karen kept her distance. For now. After the cart incident, something in the air shifted. Not dramatically, but just enough to raise the hairs on the back of Nathan's neck. It was the kind of shift you don't notice in the sound, but in the silence. Karen didn't storm back with demands or threats, and there were no more unsanctioned parties or passive-aggressive flyers nailed to the barn. For a few days, it even felt like the storm had passed. But Nathan wasn't the kind of man to mistake quiet for peace. He'd grown up around people who smiled to your face and dug into your ribs the second you turned away. That kind of behavior didn't come with alarms. It came in the form of paperwork, technicalities, and cold phone calls made behind closed doors. He kept working. Not out of denial, but because his work was what kept him steady. The bench orders didn't wait, and he had a new commission for a wide cedar frame that required careful shaping, something he couldn't rush even if he'd wanted to. But even while he carved and measured and sanded, Nathan kept an eye on the edges of the property. Watched the traffic from the road, the tire marks, the way birds scattered oddly when nothing visible moved. He wasn't paranoid, just practiced. The first real sign that things hadn't settled came in the form of a call. Not from Karen, but from a county contractor he'd dealt with once years prior. The man was polite, low-voiced, and clearly uncomfortable. He explained that an anonymous request had been filed asking the county to reevaluate conditional agricultural access for non-owner tenants operating semi-commercial activity in unzoned structures, a bureaucratic phrase that meant someone was trying to question Nathan's right to use the barn as a workspace. Nathan asked calmly what triggered the request. The contractor hesitated, then admitted the file included a report citing noise complaints, unauthorized power draw, and potential tax misclassification for rural usage. All of it was nonsense, but it was written in the language of suspicion. Not accusations, but questions, phrased to demand investigation. That was the genius of it. No one had to prove he was doing anything wrong. They just had to ask the right kind of questions, in the right language, to the right offices. It wasn't just petty anymore. It was strategic. Someone was trying to bury him under process. Nathan didn't argue. He thanked the man for the heads up and hung up. Then he took the rest of the afternoon off and drove straight into the next county to meet with Doyle. He didn't want to do this over the phone. Not because Doyle couldn't be trusted, but because Nathan had learned a long time ago that men who looked you in the eye while promising support were harder to shake loose later. The meeting went as well as it could have. Doyle, old but clear-eyed, agreed to sign a reinforced amendment to the lease that specified Nathan's right to use the barn for carpentry, mechanical repairs, and material storage. All activities protected under the state's flexible rural use provisions. It wasn't airtight, but it was strong enough to hold. More importantly, Doyle gave Nathan a copy of the full easement documentation from when the land was subdivided years ago. And there it was, in clear language, the original perimeter of the barn lot, separate from Karen's property by a buffer strip of 10 feet. It had never been communal, never shared, just poorly enforced. Armed with that, Nathan returned home and spent the rest of the week sealing every opening in the barn, installing 2 additional trail cams, and ordering new signage. Not the plastic novelty kind, but etched aluminum with formal text and statute. Citations. If Karen wanted to test the boundaries again, she'd now have to violate county code, in full view. But she didn't return. Not directly. Instead, Nathan began noticing a different pattern. Unfamiliar vehicles idling longer at the crossroads, unfamiliar faces loitering by the fence line. People he'd never seen before walking slow along the gravel like they were assessing something. One even stopped to ask if the property was part of the new rural revitalization project. Nathan told him no. The man just nodded and walked away. The revitalization project wasn't a myth. The county had been pitching it for 2 years, hoping to attract moneyed buyers looking for rustic modernity. Karen, Nathan suspected, had tied his barn into that conversation, painted it as a dead space, a forgotten asset that could be reintegrated. Maybe she thought she could bully him off the land with enough pressure, claim she was doing the community a favor. It all came to a head one morning when Nathan received a visit from someone who didn't knock. He was stacking reclaimed wood behind the barn when he heard the footsteps. Not cautious, but casual, like someone who believed they belonged. A man in business casual, tablet in hand, no badge or introduction. He looked around like he was already inside a deal, measuring the square footage. "Morning," Nathan said, stepping into his path. The man blinked, surprised. "Oh, I was told this parcel was part of the pending lot adjustment. We're conducting a preliminary survey." "Told by who?" "I'm just following the survey request. Says here it's been reclassified for multi-use under proposed development phase." "There is no development phase," Nathan said, "and there's no reclassification. This land is leased. I've got the paperwork." "If you take one more step, you're trespassing." The man hesitated, then made the mistake of trying to explain. "Look, I'm just a contractor. I don't get involved in disputes." "You already are," Nathan said. "Now turn around." The man did. Slowly. No apology. Just a retreat. And that's when Nathan understood. Karen had shifted tactics. No more amateur notes. No more parties. Now she was working through contractors, filings, and backdoor deals. And worse, she wasn't doing it alone. Someone with access was feeding her the right codes, the right forms, helping her dress her vendetta in paperwork. Nathan realized something else too. He couldn't beat this alone. Not by strength, not by tools, and not by stubbornness. This wasn't a matter of fences or locks anymore. It was a game of pressure. She was playing a long hand, hoping he'd exhaust himself defending a space she never had any right to. He wasn't paranoid. He was being targeted through systems built to make people like him give up. But Nathan wasn't giving up. Instead, he called a property attorney in town, someone who specialized in rural tenancy rights. He didn't tell Karen, didn't gloat, just handed over every file, every document, every log of incidents. The lawyer didn't make promises, just listened, nodded, and said, "You've got a case." That night, Nathan sat on his porch, watched the barn glow under his motion lights, and thought about every inch of ground he'd protected. It wasn't over. Far from it. But, for the first time, the path forward wasn't about reacting. It was about preparing to win. The phone calls started small. First from the contractor's office, then from the county zoning clerk, and finally from someone in land use compliance, a department Nathan hadn't heard of until that morning. Each voice on the other end of the line was polite, vaguely helpful, and all said roughly the same thing. "There seems to be some confusion about the status of your tenancy." They weren't threats, not exactly. They were soft nudges, carefully phrased prompts that suggested he might want to clear things up before things got more complicated. But Nathan knew better. These weren't just calls. They were signals, coordinated and deliberate. Someone was lining up pressure like dominoes, hoping he'd panic, fold, or misstep. He didn't. Instead, he logged each call, took names, requested follow-ups in writing, and forwarded everything to his attorney. The response was always the same. Silence or vague acknowledgments with no paper trail. That was how you knew it was personal. Real bureaucracy leaves fingerprints. This was sabotage wearing official language like a mask. Karen still hadn't shown up in person since the cart had been hoisted, but Nathan saw the signs of her presence in the decisions being made around him. A road grader passed unusually close to his access trail one morning, tearing up the edges like it had lost its course. His mailbox, a solid post-sunk steel box he'd reinforced after a snowplow took it out years ago, was sheared off one morning and left lying in the ditch. No note, no witnesses, just a perfect impact. A coincidence? Maybe once, but not 3 times. He started driving with a dash cam, mounted motion cameras to the trees bordering the barn, installed wireless backups to a drive in the main house. He wasn't doing it to catch Karen. He knew better than to expect her to be the one physically doing anything. That wasn't her style. She didn't vandalize. She delegated. She didn't confront. She complained. And Nathan had the growing sense that she was now moving her efforts beyond the barn. It was confirmed a week later when he found a printed flyer slid into the latch of his gate. At first glance, it looked like a real estate advertisement. Full color, professional layout, even a fake logo at the top for something called Valley Horizons Development Initiative. But what caught Nathan's eye was the photo. It was his barn, from a low angle, shot during dusk, probably from the road with a zoom lens. The caption underneath read, "Potential Community Hub. Candidate for Heritage Restoration Project under Phase 2, Heritage Restoration. Community Hub." Nathan read the words slowly, jaw tightening with every line. The flyer was promoting the idea that his barn, the one he worked in, the one he repaired with his own hands, the one he legally leased and maintained, was somehow up for repurposing. No one had asked. No one had approached him. It was an illusion dressed as a plan, a fake invitation to a project that hadn't been proposed through any legitimate channel. He forwarded it to his attorney, who responded 2 hours later with a single sentence. "They're testing the waters for a soft claim. Respond publicly and fast." So Nathan did. He printed his own flyer. A single page, black and white, but clear. "This property is leased for private use. No projects have been approved. No access will be granted. Any unauthorized entry will be prosecuted. Then he laminated a dozen copies and posted them on every post, gate, tree, and exposed panel along the barn and its perimeter. He didn't care if it looked hostile. It was hostile, because this was a war she had started, and he had been polite long enough. Days passed, but the activity didn't slow. He noticed his internet cutting out at random hours, even though his signal had always been stable. His deliveries began arriving damaged, packages dented, wood orders with split ends, even a box of custom hinges missing half its inventory. Nothing was provable, but all of it together was too consistent to ignore. His supply chain was being quietly strangled. His workspace was being misrepresented. And somewhere out there, Karen, or whoever was helping her, was tightening the pressure in hopes that he'd walk away. Then came the inspection. He was in the middle of fitting a set of curved beams when a white SUV pulled up the drive. Two men stepped out, both in khakis, clipboards in hand, not smiling. One introduced himself as a field auditor from Structural Code Assurance, another name Nathan had never heard before. They claimed they had received a complaint about potential load-bearing irregularities in an unregulated structure. Nathan asked to see the paperwork authorizing the inspection. They handed him a printed form, unsigned, undated, no official letterhead. "You're not coming in," Nathan said flatly. One of the men lifted his chin slightly. "We can file an injunction if you obstruct an open complaint." "I'm not obstructing anything. I'm denying unauthorized access to a private structure that doesn't fall under your jurisdiction. If you want entry, come back with a warrant or bring someone from county zoning with a seal." The men didn't press. They exchanged a glance, mumbled something about rescheduling, and drove off. Nathan stood there for another 10 minutes, eyes on the horizon, jaw locked. The next morning, he filed a formal report with the sheriff's office. Not an accusation, just a preemptive warning that individuals had attempted to enter under false pretense. He also added an additional layer of fencing around the barn's rear exit, double-locked with a warning sign that cited trespass statutes verbatim. And still, the pressure didn't let up. A week later, while checking his outer trail cams, Nathan caught something new. Around 2 a.m, headlights approached the trail from a side road. The vehicle, a truck or large SUV, idled for over 12 minutes, then slowly backed out. At no point did anyone exit the vehicle, but the message was clear. He was being watched. Not randomly, not curiously, strategically. Nathan didn't panic. He reinforced, strengthened, adapted. He knew she was still hiding behind the process, still hoping to use code and confusion to grind him down. But she hadn't broken through. Not yet. So she escalated again. It came in the form of a petition. One of his neighbors, a man who rarely spoke, just nodded across the field now and then, handed Nathan a folded sheet of paper with an apologetic look. "Thought you ought to see this," he said. The sheet was a copy. At the top, bold letters. Request for reclassification of agricultural structures on shared boundaries. Beneath it, a list of names, some real, some questionable, including Karen's and 2 others Nathan didn't recognize. It was a request to strip his barn of individual designation and open it for potential community resource allocation. None of it was legally binding, but it was political. If enough people signed, if enough pressure reached the county board, they could push a review. And in that review, someone could choose to reconsider zoning designations. And that was all Karen needed. She hadn't stopped trying to take the barn. She'd just changed her method. But what she hadn't expected, what she never understood, was that Nathan wasn't defending the barn because it was sentimental. He was defending it because it was his by lease, by sweat, by intent. And because no amount of signatures could undo what had been built with purpose. That night, he didn't sleep. He worked. Repainted the barn's front sign with bright, weatherproof letters, filed 2 new notices of use with the county, scheduled an independent assessment to verify the structure's compliance and safety, not because it was required, but because he wanted every inch of the process airtight. The next morning, he called the sheriff's office again and formally requested a patrol pass by at night, just once a week for visibility. They agreed. He filed the camera footage, the petition, the photos of the flyer, everything, as a growing report. His lawyer added it to the record. Karen had tried to make him react, but Nathan wasn't reacting. He was preparing to bury her efforts in legal weight, 1 page at a time. The heat arrived early that morning, the kind that pressed down with weight rather than temperature, the kind that filled the barn with a dense metallic stillness before noon even touched the trees. Nathan felt it not just in the weather but in the air around the property, the sense that something was finally, inevitably tipping. For weeks, Karen had circled, probed, filed, and manipulated, and while her hands never appeared in the mess directly, Nathan had tracked every move like a man watching a slow gas leak fill a locked room. Now the room was full. Now the spark was coming. The petition had gained just enough traction to reach a hearing. Informal, procedural, but real. The county board agreed to schedule a review session, citing citizen concern over shared property resources. No ruling would be made that day, but Nathan wasn't naive. Karen didn't need a ruling. She needed a foothold, a platform to frame him as unreasonable, as obstructionist, as some loner standing in the way of community good. He could already hear the phrases forming: revitalization, underutilized space, cooperative potential. He didn't panic. He documented. Over the next 2 days, he prepared a presentation, not with dramatics or personal complaints, but with data, lease history, maintenance logs, a mapped chronology of every incident including camera footage, digital timestamps, forged notices, and unauthorized inspections. It wasn't a defense. It was an audit of a campaign. By the time he finished compiling it, the file was 83 pages long and precise to the hour. But Nathan also knew evidence wasn't always enough. Perception mattered. That's why he arrived at the review hearing early, parked in the lot with his truck facing the building entrance. He wore clean boots, a tucked-in shirt, and carried only 1 folder. Inside, the room was colder than he expected. Maybe the air conditioning, maybe the crowd. Karen sat at the far end, dressed like she was attending a wine tasting, flanked by 2 others, a local broker and a woman Nathan recognized from the walking trails. The county board sat in the middle, 5 members, none of whom he knew personally, though one of them offered a tight nod when he entered. The review was civil. They always are. Karen went first. Her tone was soft, her wording flawless. She spoke about community spirit, underused structures, the need for shared spaces during high temperatures and emergencies. She referenced safety studies and passive support from other residents who allegedly didn't feel safe approaching Nathan directly. She never once accused him. She framed the situation as unfortunate, a miscommunication that could be solved with a little generosity. Then they turned to Nathan. He stood slowly, unfolded his file, and spoke without raising his voice once. He explained the lease, showed copies of the addendum, and submitted photos of the unauthorized gatherings, forged notices, and damage reports. He spoke about the fake real estate materials, the surveyors who arrived without permits, and the suspicious surveillance at night. He didn't make accusations. He showed patterns. When he finished, he placed the file on the clerk's desk and returned to his seat without looking at Karen. What followed was silence. Then questions. The board asked if Karen had evidence supporting community interest. Signed letters, formal statements. She did not. Only vague references and 3 signatures on the petition, 2 of which were later revealed to be from seasonal residents with no legal stake in the zoning. One member of the board asked directly, Why was this structure singled out for community use if it's already leased and maintained? Karen gave a practiced answer, something about natural accessibility and neutral potential. But the tone in the room had already shifted. Nathan could feel it. The tide, long pushed by Karen's quiet campaign, was now facing resistance, not from him, from the process she had tried to manipulate. After the hearing, the board adjourned with no decision, pending a formal investigation. But Nathan didn't wait. That night he returned to the barn, unlocked the main doors, and set to work with a clear purpose. He wasn't defending his claim anymore. He was reinforcing his legacy. He tore out the old interior lighting and installed industrial fixtures. Upgraded the electrical wiring, labeled each panel. He refinished the outer wall, sanded down every scratch Karen's guests had left, and repainted the trim in deep iron gray. He didn't sleep. He didn't stop. By the time the sun rose, the barn looked not just functional but fortified. And then, just after noon, she came. Karen didn't drive this time. She walked as if appearing on foot would change the narrative. No cart, no sunglasses, just her and a smile she wore like armor. Nathan was outside, tightening the final bolt on the new signage when she arrived. "You know, this doesn't have to be a war," she said softly. Nathan didn't answer. "We could have made this something beautiful. A hub for art, a cooling shelter. You didn't even ask what people wanted." Still, he said nothing. Only turned, picked up the last sign, one with bold etched letters that read, "Private Work Site, Trespassers Will Be Reported," and mounted it directly in front of her, driving the post deep into the soil with 2 hard blows of a steel hammer. Karen didn't flinch. "You think this means you've won, but people forget how fast things change. Your lease could end. The board could shift. This barn won't always be yours." Nathan looked up, his face calm, voice low. "Maybe not, but today it is, and that's enough." She stood there a moment longer, perhaps waiting for something. A crack, a plea, a mistake. But there was nothing left to take. She turned and left without another word. Nathan watched her go, not with triumph, but with the cold certainty of a man who had endured a siege not by fighting louder, but by refusing to yield. She hadn't beaten him, and now she knew it. And the barn, standing behind him in the late light, wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a line she'd never cross again. Weeks passed, and though the air stayed thick with summer heat, the tension around the property began to dissolve. Not all at once, but gradually, like fog lifting off a field at dawn. Karen had disappeared from the immediate picture. No visits, no new petitions, no strange surveyors or thinly veiled threats hiding behind friendly voices. The road quieted. The gate stayed untouched. Nathan didn't let down his guard, but he allowed himself for the first time in a long while to exhale. The county's investigation ended quietly. A formal notice arrived by mail confirming that his lease remained valid, his usage appropriate, and no further zoning discussion would be considered without a full board review and direct landowner involvement. The wording was polite, almost sterile, but Nathan understood what it meant. Her maneuvering had failed to stick. He had pulled the curtain back far enough that the officials could no longer ignore what they were looking at. Karen might have had influence, but she didn't have the truth, and truth, however slow, still carried weight. Nathan didn't celebrate. He didn't call Doyle to gloat or write letters of satisfaction. He returned to the barn, as always, and got back to work. There were new commissions now. Word had spread somehow that he took custom orders seriously. A couple from the next town over requested a cedar porch swing. A family wanted a treehouse platform designed with the grain of old pine. Work was steady, and that, more than anything, was what made the victory real. He hadn't just kept the barn. He'd kept the life it gave him. But the story didn't end with Karen disappearing. One morning, Nathan found a small manila envelope wedged between the bars of his gate. No name, no address. Inside, a single folded page, a typed note, unsigned, short. Some people are louder than they are strong. Keep building. Beneath it, a grainy photo of Karen's house with a "for sale" sign posted in the yard. Nathan didn't smile. He didn't feel relief or revenge, just a kind of clarity, the understanding that her battle hadn't been about the barn at all. It had been about control, proximity, the need to bend the world around her until it fit the shape of her comfort. And when she failed to do that, when someone finally said no and meant it, she had nowhere else to point her will. In the months that followed, the neighborhood settled. People who had once kept their distance now nodded across the fields. A few even stopped by, curious about the woodwork, curious about the man who had, quietly and without spectacle, pushed back against a machine built on whispers. He didn't tell them the full story. He didn't need to. The boards in the barn spoke loud enough. Repaired, sealed, reinforced. They carried the marks of a man who didn't run. By the time fall came and the leaves began to turn, Nathan stood once more at the edge of his land, watching the wind move through the trees. The barn behind him was just as it had been. Not fancier, not bigger, but intact. His. Earned and kept. Whatever came next, he was ready, and this time no one would park in his shadow again.